Hello everybody, welcome back. I wanted to make today a short video about tactile switches because it is a common failure point on all cassette decks and they're a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complicated than you might think. If you've got a cassette deck and it has your logic buttons on the front that you press rather than big chunky buttons, then to be honest with you, the chances are behind it is some tactile switches. And what is a tactile switch? So I've got a unit, a screen here, which is off the front of a Sony cassette deck, and the tactile switch is these little things here, and they click and they make a bit of noise, and it's a simple switch. One line of connections goes across the top two, and one line of connections goes across the bottom two, and when you press the switch, it joins those connections. It's a switch. Pretty straightforward, yeah? Well, not particularly that straightforward, because what you might find is, say if on your deck your play button or your reverse button or your fast forward button isn't working, chances are in time all the rest of them will stop working. And there's a good reason for that, is because these switches aren't just an off and on switch like any other switch. Like this power switch, for instance, is just an off and on switch. It makes a connection and it's as simple as that. Tactile switches are kind of wired in series, and in between all these switches is resistors of varying resistance. And what happens is when you press, say, this switch, the resistance between this switch and going back through the circuit all the way back to the IC is detected. So let's say these resistance values are 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, just to make life simple, and I'll show you on a service manual sheet in a minute what they actually are. So if I press that switch, it's going to cut off from here onwards. My fingers are a bit dirty there, and the resistance value is going to be 1. If we do this one here, then it's going to be 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. So if you press that one, the resistance value would be 6. So because of the weird way that these things are wired up in kind of in a series but also not, they can cause strange occurrences with buttons, because what a combination of some of these resistors might equal to one of the other resistors. Now, if I was designing a cassette deck, there must be some maths in the way that would cause you to be able to avoid that. So what happens is, sometimes if you were to press play, the deck will go into fast forward or into record, because the value of the fault that you have would equal to what it's looking for if you were to press the record button instead of the play button and everything was working. So I'll see if I can show you on the back here of the setup of these. If we can just flap these ribbon cables out of the way. So if I can show you on the back here, this is the back of our tactile switches, as you can see. So the bottom layer, or the bottom connection track, goes all the way along the bottom and all the way along the bottom and all the way along for the entire row of tactile switches, all the way down here. These bits with the black dots in is the resistors I showed you on the other side. So what happens is, when you make, say, this tactile switch, it's actually making a connection here between this bottom line of tracks and this top line of tracks, and then that connection goes up through that resistor and back down and through another tactile switch and through that resistor and back up to the IC. So all the way over here, or all the way over here, depending on which way the power goes in and out and the way the tracks work, you can imagine it has to go through all of those resistors and all of those tactile switches and everything else. Now, my experience, these tactile switches can be individually replaced and repaired. If you want, you can spray a bit of contact cleaner inside, and sometimes that'll work. You can just see where I've kind of been spraying contact cleaner, perhaps, and it's dried. It kind of worked for a little bit and then it stopped working completely. So this entire row of tactile switches doesn't work. And I'm sure one of them is at fault. Possibly it's the resistors at fault as well, but it's very unlikely because of the small amount of voltages that are going through this. So what you've got to do, unfortunately, is replace all of the tactile switches in the sequence. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So we've got 3, 5, 9 switches. They're pretty cheap, to be honest with you. They're easy to get hold of. I think I bought 10 off eBay for about £2.70 delivered, something like that. But I'll take you through what you got to do if you need to replace them, because there's two measurements that you need. I'm just wrecking the place. So the measurements you need if you need to produce or purchase some more tactile switches is going to be the width, it's going to be the length, and it's also going to be the height, because when you reinstall this board, if they're too high, the buttons won't sit properly over the top of the switches. So you've got to measure, you've got to take this measurement up here, which on these ones is, I think it's 5mm. I've already ordered these. It's 5mm. Ignore my flashing digital readout there, it's a bit rubbish. These are 6x6 by 5mm high, and the measurement of the height also includes the black button on the top as well. So it's going to be a really quick video. This just stopped working altogether. It was working a little bit, so hopefully tomorrow morning we'll skip back to this. I'll receive some tactile switches and we can install them all correctly, because as I said, they've got to be installed in the correct rotation, because these two terminals and these two terminals are what are joined together. So if you have them the wrong way around, then it'll forever be joined up and then it'll all go crazy. So there's going to be markers on them at pin 1, pin 2 and all the rest of the stuff. So skip forward to the next bit and I'll show you some when I receive them, but let's have a quick look at the service docs, and hopefully those of you that are into and can understand electrical wiring diagrams, you can kind of get a bit of a gist of what I'm talking about outside of my bumbling and bambling in front of a piece of circuit board. So here we are then, right in the middle of the service manual. This is the service manual diagram for the board that I just showed you. And what we've got over here is we have our remote control receiver. Now, one thing that's interesting about remote control receivers, if you do have one, is sometimes it can go a bit crazy. And if we follow this thick black line at pin number 3 here, you'll follow that all the way around and all the way around, and you'll notice that basically that becomes kind of the earth or the one side of the connection for these tactile switches. So that is one reason sometimes why these spoon up, because your remote control receiver is receiving crazy UV light out your window or something like that. So one solution for this before you start repairing things is stick a bit of tape over your remote control receiver, see if that solves it. If it doesn't, here on the left hand side is our tactile switches. So S752, 753, 754, 755. So as you can see, this is S752 is your stop button, 753 is rewind, 754 fast forward, etc, etc. And you'll notice on the left there, over here, if I can bring us in, R759 2K resistor. So as you can see, depending on how these switches make, or how, if they're open or fail closed or something, it can really spoon up the levels of resistance that are sent back to the IC. So like I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to simplify it, when we looked at the circuit board there, on the left the top one's 2K, 2.7K, 5.6K, 11K and 30K. So depending on how your switches have failed, can either totally wipe out the entire block, or it can also cause massive issues with the remaining switches by confusing the IC as to what switch has actually been made. And therefore that's why one tactile switch can cause all number of problems and be difficult to basically diagnose as to which one it is. So when you look on websites such as Tapeheads and things like that, I generally don't go on Tapeheads, it's a bit too serious for my liking, but things like Tapeheads, the first thing will be just replace all of them. And this is the reason why, because replacing all of them will remove any sort of guesstimation as to what your fault is, and hopefully ensure that you don't get weird faults rather than one button doesn't work. And in my experience, it's not usually one button that doesn't work, it's usually a whole series, or it does something you're not expecting. No matter how clean they are, no matter how well they look or how they test, just replace them. So let's move on to replacing them, and then we'll test it, and hopefully we'll test my theory. Ta-da! 1 bag of 10. Next day, not bad. Right, that's everything out now. There's nothing visibly wrong with them. There's nothing particularly obvious as to why they're not working. They're kind of sealed units as well, so not really a lot that can be done other than replace, as we said. So let's get a new one soldered in. Alright, that's it. Actual time of resoldering there was about 60 seconds, I think. The resoldering of these is really easy. You've got to make sure that they are all flat to the board as well. So when you reinstall this into the deck, it's got the plastic buttons on top of these tactile switches. So you've got to make sure they're all seated nice. And I mean, move a light over there, it's getting a bit of Beetlejuice vibes going on. But yeah, there we go. Let's get it back in the deck. Alright, so now, if we are plugged in, which we aren't, we should see some kind of a result. There we go. And because they're nice and new as well, all these buttons now feel, oh, box fresh. So next time you're messing about with tactile switches, or next time one of your logic control switches goes wrong, or just mugs you off a little bit and you're thinking about changing them, spare a thought for how complicated these simple little switches are. Just a quick video this one. I thought while I was doing it, I've had a lot of these K611s in recently. I don't know whether they're going through a spate of them all dying, but I didn't see the point of making loads of videos on the same deck. I've done this deck to death. So once I've sorted this queue out, we should be on to something a little bit different. If you've enjoyed this video, go through my library. I've got loads of other videos with cassette decks and amplifiers and messing about and a bit of fun and fixing things like that. Maybe even subscribe, because that makes me happy. And when it makes me happy, everybody's happy. So, hope you've enjoyed this one. On to the next one. Peace!